Coming up in this episode, if we can be more open and quiet in our own minds, we can learn a lot from speaking to other people because there's going to be room for us to take in more things. Where if we have a lot of things going on, a lot of expectations and whatnot, that's going to not leave as much space for a nuanced, um, complex perspective to come across from another person. But I've typically been more biased towards negative feedback as being truthful, honest feedback because positive feedback in a social context is so often what people do.
The more emotion someone is expressing, the less I believe them. So if they say,
Mhm.
"Wow, you're really smart," and it's like a big thing, and they're really trying to compliment me,
Mhm.
uh, I believe them less. Or if they say, "You're really dumb. Do you know that?" I would also not believe them because there's emotion clouds truth.
Mhm.
Um,
Interesting.
so yeah,
Do
I
you
look at that. Yeah.
do you know where that may come from? Hey everybody, I'm Cody.
And I'm Evan,
Welcome back to Men's Search for Meaning.
the podcast where we explore concepts that we can all relate to and walk away with a deeper understanding of ourselves and what we think.
Okay, so the idea I had today was around feedback, thinking of like positive and negative feedback. And you had mentioned something when we were talking the other day about your son and receiving feedback from essentially a teacher. And, they were saying, oh, he's a very special child. And, as a parent, that feels really nice to hear. But you made a comment that's like, yeah, but, also, like he said more things after that that substantiated that further. And I think made it more impactful. But just that one comment on its own, I think what I heard, or at least putting it in my own words, it sort of struck you as a common social thing that's done. People are very um, protective and enthusiastic about their children. So generally, it's common to compliment them. But it stood out to me because for myself, have noticed that have typically been more biased towards negative feedback as being truthful, honest feedback because positive feedback in a social context is so often what people do generally, and I don't think they never mean it, but it's hard to tell where that line is because it's so common for people to say, "Oh, you did a great job. We're so happy to come and support you." And I think there's genuine feelings in there, but it's hard to tell where the genuine feeling stops and perhaps where the social you might have a better way of describing this where the social component starts, and I think it can be difficult to parse out. I have since learned that some people are just biased towards negative feedback as well, so that's left me in a position of like, okay, what do I believe then? How do I navigate this? And I'm still exploring that a bit, but I thought this would be interesting to talk about because it really nails that relatable component that we aim for. Yet I don't often hear people um, delving into the nuance of this and trying to walk away from it with more of an understanding. So, what do you think? What stands out to you first? What grabs you?
Well, first, I just want to clarify what you're saying, which is that you believe negative feedback when it's given to you more than you believe positive feedback.
Historically, I have. I'm reevaluating that at this point in my life because I feel like that's not the right answer either. But because it's generally more difficult and more uncomfortable to give negative feedback, it felt more honest because it's hard to do for
Right.
some people. And so I was like, okay, well that took a little more courage, I guess, to give that feedback than just saying, "Oh, great job." And I think there's a place for all those things, but I definitely want to delve in there. So yeah, historically that was the case because it felt like it was generally more honest. I don't think that's true. I think it can be true, but I don't think it's true as a rule.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I would say I believe negative feedback about me more than positive, although possibly as we explore it, I'll find that. But I think will find that my split of, what is more believable, compliments or criticism will be like, 60-40 at most. That's my guess, but let's see what happens by the end of this conversation. And that's because I find that believability is something that I spend a lot of energy assessing about a person when I meet them. It's
Mhm.
unconscious. I don't mean to, but I think I'm looking at the level of emotion they're expressing. The more emotion someone is expressing, the less I believe them. So if they say,
Mm.
"Wow, you're really smart," and it's like a big thing, and they're really trying to compliment me,
Mhm.
uh, I believe them less. Or if they say, "You're really dumb. Do you know that?" I would also not believe them because there's emotion clouds truth.
Mhm.
Um,
Interesting.
so yeah,
Do
I
you
look at that. Yeah.
do you know where that may come from? Do you have any conscious, or any conscious awareness of how or when that may have started, or does that kind of go into the subconscious? Because that is interesting. Because I'm imagining someone saying, "You're very dumb," and you're like,
Well, I would believe that they were being genuine, which would call me to reflect on what they're saying if they're not crazy or something. If this is like a person that sounds at all credible.
"Yeah,
And not if they said, "You're dumb," because that actually would be hilarious. Um, it if they said, "It seems that you suffer from like a low IQ, but
mm."
something like they're thinking about it as they're saying it." I mean, there are people that have mastered the art of insulting people in casual ways, so even
Well, I
that
think
could be yeah.
yeah, I think once anyone discovers something like that, they know they can then use it as a strategy. So if they hear someone say, "You know what? I listen most to people who have a measured approach and aren't being emotional in what they're saying." There's some people that would just go, "Oh, interesting," and there's some people that would be like, "Okay, I'm going to try to use that as a tool. I've learned something there."
Right.
Um, so that's, I think, just a game that's going on with some people all the time of like trying to understand what works, how to get through to people, and it can be on a spectrum of perfectly um, ordinary to maybe more manipulative on one end. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like adding for the sake of truth that if somebody's very emotional and they compliment me, I still like it. I generally like to be complimented. However,
Yeah.
there's an experience that I have that, feels like it's relevant to this conversation, which is that I give, public talks about what I do for work, which is something I'm very good at. I've done it for almost 20 years, and I know this stuff, back and forth. So, frequently, people say, "Wow, that was the clearest explanation of the concept I've seen. That was one of the better talks I've heard on the subject." And it really doesn't mean much to me because I hear it a lot. Um, so I just wanna note that too. I guess it's because they're saying something that I feel I know, like, I know I'm
Mhm.
good at talking about that specific subject.
Yeah.
Um, and so it doesn't really go anywhere. So I guess what it brings up for me is that the uniqueness of the statement has a big effect on how much I believe it as well.
And it sounds
Um,
like what also has an effect is whether you believe it. If you believe that you're performing in something that you're skilled at and someone compliments you for it, then you're more likely to take that feedback in that they're giving because you also, it's like you're signing off on it as well. Whereas if you did something that you were bad at and someone said, "Wow, you're doing a great job," you'd be like, Okay, I don't agree with that. So that, yeah, there's some interesting things standing out here. One is that I hadn't thought about the emotional aspect before because I can imagine someone delivering feedback in an emotional way but there's still being something in there that feels very honest. So something else that can be present that would allow me to believe that. And then you're mentioning someone elaborating on something. If someone just said you're dumb, it's not gonna land very much because it doesn't feel like a measured, careful assessment. So if someone puts a lot more thought into it, presents something more compelling, that has the tendency to land more. And then the last piece was so far was if you are likely to agree with what they're saying as well, then it's more likely to land. And we've actually talked about this before, and this is something that I've I discovered at some point, and it really made an impact that, if someone came up to me and they were like, "You are," I think we talked about this recently, but if they were like, "I hate your blue hair,"
Mhm,
I'd be like, "Okay, well, I don't have blue hair, so
mhm.
continue on your way." Where it's like if it's something so far fetched, it doesn't land at all because you don't believe it. Whereas if someone um insult something, closer to home or something that we do believe to be true, then it's more likely to have an impact. And that seems to be, it can go both ways for a compliment as well as a criticism. When we believe it, it carries that thing a little bit farther for better or for worse.
Yeah, that sounds totally accurate. So, right, it's a confluence of several factors, but I think I wanna underscore how important the emotional one is
Yeah.
because I've noticed this during, when I've had, like, dialogues with people, essentially, when I'm having, like, longer conversations with people that, we disagree on a subject, which doesn't happen much, but I've specifically sought these out.
Hmm.
And we're talking about, like, something that is an emotional or ideological topic. It's very hard to get through to somebody because they are dug in their beliefs, and if you say something and you're trying to hide your emotion, but it comes through anyway,
Hmm.
um, you lose your credibility instantly. It's pretty amazing to behold, but if you, demonstrate that you're thinking while you're talking, I guess like I am now
Yeah.
because I am thinking as I'm talking, and you say it in original words, like you don't use the cliched phrase, um, we can all think of cliched phrases that are around political, uh positions people have where people say like, "Oh, this is the worst blah 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 in 100 years or history," or,
Hmm.
"This is the equivalent of," some negative thing.
Hmm.
Um, it's just you've heard it many times before. It's being said with this, like, uh, primal anger, just like
Hmm.
this deep anger, even if you're trying to hold it back, and it just kills your credibility. But if it sounds like you've really thought about it and you're not emotional, it's the only way I've found to get across to somebody that disagrees with you on a subject.
Yeah. I hear a couple pieces in there. And there's this spectrum of being emotional that I was thinking of a different place on that spectrum. I was imagining someone responding to a piece of art or some sort of creative thing and feeling very swept up in what they had experienced, and that being a level of emotion that, to me, can bring more credibility because it's hard to pretend you're having a strong reaction to something. Um, and I think you're thinking of it in a separate context of someone arguing for something or debating something, and the more emotional they come across, the less grounded they seem. And I think that is a way to lose credibility, and why so many people want to have that calm and collected way of describing something, because it makes them seem very in control and very confident, whereas an emotional response makes someone seem like they're getting swept up and carried away, and that can often, they can lose favor in whatever that discussion is. And there was another piece that I wanted to mention as a result of that around, I can't remember what it was. Um,
Can I
yeah,
add
so
something then? Um, I was talking about emotion making you less believable only in the context of when someone is giving you feedback on yourself.
mhm,
So I don't know if we were talking about the exact same thing. And I did think about what you said originally, which is that, sometimes the right emotion can make someone more believable. And I do think that's true, but I think that it shouldn't be. I think it's objectively like doesn't lead to greater believability. I was imagining that you meant something like a really positive moment where someone is like really touched by something and then like gives you positive feedback. Is that more believable? Or according to my experience or my theory, it's less. I still think it's less. Like if someone's like really moved by a piece of art and they say, this is, truly one of the great masterpieces in, XYZ genre, I think
mhm,
they're less believable, even though I would like to believe them more. It's very compelling, but
mhm,
it's not necessarily as, I think anytime you have emotion, uh, your ability to speak the objective truth goes down. Not that I'm a fan of a world like that. I really appreciate when people express their emotion, but if we're
Yeah.
talking about whether our little antennae raise as far as, like, should I take in this feedback as true, positive or
Mhm.
negative, I notice I unconsciously disregard it just a little bit more if the person doesn't seem like they've really thought about it and considered it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and to me, that strikes me as sort of a stylistic preference, because there's something that I enjoy or can gravitate to about being very in the moment of something and very kind of awestruck by something, but I can understand where you're coming from that for whatever reason that can come across as um, someone being swept up in the moment doesn't always mean they're having a defensible experience that they will feel the same way about indefinitely, right? If you go to a concert and it's like the music is done very well and the lights are um, very vivid and the audience is great, it's very easy to get swept up in that moment. And perhaps your experience being so strong can be a result of those things where when you walk away from it, you're like, yeah, maybe I got kind of caught up in what was happening and it wasn't as amazing as it seemed. But then there's a very philosophical question in there, which is like, well, which is true, you know? And it sounds like you tend to align more with the way that you can feel more consistently for a longer period of time is more true. And I can definitely see that. And I probably think that same way in a lot of ways, but I think there's cases for being swept up and very awestruck for different reasons that can also feel true, but there seems to be a slight tug of war there between which of those is I don't know if this is getting to the periphery of my awareness, so it's very difficult to put words to it, but yeah, they just seem like different positions sort of in a tug of war of which is the right way to do it or which is the more defensible way of looking at it. Do you see that as well, or do you
Yeah, I do. I'm going to try to tease it out because I do think it's a complicated thing, but a really interesting one that you brought
Yeah,
up. So let's say you were the performer in the concert, which I know you can
yeah,
relate to since you are a musician and a performer. Um, if I was a performer and the concert just ended and everybody was still high on the music, I would totally enjoy taking in, the positive things about it. I might
mhm,
disregard the negative a little bit more because I too would be in an emotional state. But
mhm,
if, 2 days later, my concert analytics guy said, you know, we got I'm trying to think, like, if people rated it after, they might be in an emotional state, so not even that. But basically, I could tell from tracking people's eye movements that people were watching the concert and looking, positive. There was a positive expression, let's say,
uh-huh,
tracking facial expressions,
sure,
for 80% of the time, and according like, based on the average, that's 2 standard deviations higher,
mhm,
than what we usually see. Uh, Even though I would not enjoy that as much, I think I would believe it a little bit more.
mhm,
Um, so it really comes down to I I think probably the complication here is when you're receiving feedback, positive or negative from somebody, just in
mhm,
the casual passing of life, like, somebody's like, "Oh, yeah, I really like that shirt," or, "Do you think you could not do that?" Or, like, the mood you're in really affects whether you believe it, unless it's something that always emotionally hits you. It's an insecurity or something. I think that'll always hit you hard,
yeah,
um, but people don't usually just have, like, really objective, formal, receptions of the feedback to be able to just sit down and analyze it and, not show emotion. So it's tough to tease out what we really, do believe, since I think believability changes based on our level of emotion, our mood, the
yeah,
context.
and I think some personal preference too. Something I'm thinking of as another angle. I don't want to spend all of our time in this one very in the weeds philosophical angle. I think it's interesting, but I want to make sure we come back to some of the other parts of the discussion. But what I think of in listening to you kind of try to tease that apart, um, I'm sure you've been in a position at some point of being drunk and how that can make things feel so much more exciting or someone being like, oh, I love you, man, and
Go
how
for it.
people can have those really passionate in the moment experiences. Are you someone who feels uncomfortable after experiencing something like that, being on the giving end of that kind of thing, of getting very swept up? And because I do. If
Yeah,
that
yeah.
kind of thing happens, I feel like, oh man, I really got caught up. I didn't feel like I was grounded. There's something important to me about being grounded, and I wonder if this might have something to do with our preference, because I think not everyone would be bothered by that. Is that something that you would feel like a little bit like a little cringy, like maybe you're not going to worry about it too much? But what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
I would also be a little embarrassed, but I don't like that. I think that's an area of growth for me because
Sure.
when I think about the people in my life that are more expressive, that let's say get drunk or high or something, and then are more expressive and demonstrative, I like those people. It's like,
Hmm.
uh, even if in, the middle of the day, if we, see each other, would we act that way or would they act that way? No.
Hmm.
But I like it, and so I assume others probably would feel the same way unless it was, unrealistic over the top or something silly, like I'm
Yeah.
on ecstasy or something and they're just sober. So, yeah, it's an interesting subject. I would be a little like, "Oh, shoot." It wouldn't be fun if you were just, like, totally sober and saying the exact right thing all the time, like, I don't want that.
Yeah. I would have to imagine, and this would be a situation where I would ask people to let us know your thoughts in the comments, because this feels like a, I called it a tug of war, you can call it a spectrum. I think it's something where no one fully identifies with one position, that we're all kind of moving around. We may have set ranges for where we exist on that spectrum, or how far that tug of war can pull. But yeah, let us know what you think about this in particular, because I think this is sort of an interesting tangent that spawned out of this conversation that is kind of fascinating, because in some ways I really like being caught up in the moment and having that kind of just like, wow, that was an incredible experience. And I think you have to let go of some of the trying to stay grounded to allow that to happen. It's kind of like, I think of a cliche in a movie of like someone who doesn't like to dance and they're kind of very stiff. They're like, no, I don't want to, versus the person who just kind of lets loose on the dance floor, and they're kind of uh, very different experiences. And I think we all kind of slide around on a spectrum. So let us know in the comments where you align with that, if you have any thoughts about this, because that will be interesting. I want to hear more perspectives than just ours. Um, are there any other thoughts on this sort of tangent that you wanted to add, of this spectrum we've been describing and trying to tease apart and describe? Because if not, I have another direction I want to ask you about this topic.
Yeah, I just have one last thing, which is I'm kinda realizing that it's not necessarily more true, what someone says or what you say when you're in, like, a state of, exhilaration, let's say, than if you're in a really bad mood. I guess both of them can be true at different moments, and so I don't think you should totally disregard what someone says. Let's say they're on, like, ayahuasca or something like that. Um, I had, a friend of mine that I haven't spoken to in a long time that we had a nice close relationship, was, I believe, on, ayahuasca or something like that, and, uh, sent me, a message, and it was like, "Oh, I haven't talked to this person in years,"
Hmm.
and was just like, "I love you, man," and I was like, "Oh, wow." That just came out of nowhere in the middle of my workday.
Yeah.
Um, and even though I was in, like, the most sober of moods, and I would say my friend was far more in a stun
Affected
sub
mind state.
I was gonna say subconscious, like, deep
Yeah.
into the psyche.
Shitting his
I
pants in the jungle somewhere.
That's probably true. But, is that less believable than, let's say, I'm just bumming around, not in a good mood, didn't get that much sleep, and I'm just like, "Yeah, he's a good guy, I haven't talked to him in a while, but no, I like
Yeah.
him." Like, is that
Yeah.
or if he were to say that about me, I don't know that that's more true than how he felt on that in that moment. It depends on
Yeah.
the moment, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say if it's more or less true, or to weigh any judgment on that, because I was then imagining a person who is on drugs, or something like that all the time, and that's just their way of speaking all the time. Would that
Mhm.
make it any less true? I think my knee jerk reaction would be to say yes because
Mhm.
they're just always going there, but maybe that's their truth. Maybe that's the world they live in and that's how they identify and think about things, you know? That's where sometimes we try to put people who don't fit through our own way of looking at things, and it's possible to do because we all do it all the time, but I think there can be a big misunderstanding. You know, some perspectives don't fit through our own perspective and therefore don't make sense through our own lens because they're so fundamentally different, and that could be one. So yeah, this gets murky quickly. It's very, very personal and very subjective. And I don't think there is a correct answer. I think the best we can do is hope to understand what feels right for us. And that's kind of as far as it goes. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but just noting that there is feedback that penetrates a little bit more, that really matters to you,
Yeah,
and you find yourself thinking about. So it's worth acknowledging that
sure.
you can, believe feedback even given in an emotional state, which is, I guess, me evolving,
Hmm.
a bit on that. Well, it certainly deserves credibility, even if you're like, "Well, is that objectively true?" Because 'Cause I'm not gonna always analyze it like that. I probably won't a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Let's
yeah, I do agree, yeah.
Okay. I think that what you just said is a perfect transition to what I wanted to ask you about next, which is coming back to the positive versus negative feedback, what's believable. There is it is necessary to have some sort of model to navigate the world with because we're exposed to these kind of situations all the time if we're in social situations. And oddly enough, the tangent we went on does seem to explain this a little bit, which is, I'm imagining after a performance or something, and someone approached me saying, "Hey, that was really fun. You sounded great." I would tend to, and this has nothing to do with the person saying it. I would tend to be like, "Oh, thank you." But I wouldn't put a lot of stock into it. I wouldn't be like, "Wow, that person really had a great time. That's really landing for me." Even if I thought I did well, and that just says more about me and what I have found to be believable. But it's also possible that what we've explored is that can be someone's authentic experience. Not every feedback has to be nuanced and someone saying something in their own words in a way that hasn't quite been said to you before. I think both of us value that, that would land more because it would feel like, wow, this person really thought about this. They're really having a novel idea that they're expressing that's meaningful, and I think that's something that we resonate with just based on our personalities. But yeah, curious if you have any thoughts about that, and also I want to pose the question: what sort of model do you use to operate in a world where this kind of thing is present all the time? um I think a common one is like, people will say, just take the compliment, of just being like, thank you for coming, appreciate the support or something. You don't have to be like, do you really mean that? Was it actually good? Did you notice that we made these mistakes? That can generally destabilize things more, that pursuit of a deeper truth. So yeah, do you have any thoughts about how you navigate this or any of the other things that I mentioned?
Yeah, my model is sincerity. I know that almost sounds obnoxious, like, well, I just act like myself, Cody. Uh,
That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd.
it actually took me a while to get to this place because I was in my head a lot, like, oh, people have given this advice that if you get a compliment, try not to just wave it off and be like, oh, thank you. Like, and I
Hmm.
remember reading that that's the right thing to do and trying to adjust my behavior
Yeah.
um, to meet that standard. But eventually I got to a place where I'm like, I will be polite in the moment of a compliment, and I will be gracious in a moment of a critique of me.
Hmm.
I don't have to be gracious if someone's being mean, but I still
Hmm.
think about it anyway because any critique is valuable, I think.
Yeah.
Um, if it's given in someone's right mind and it's not like, completely driven by something that is not
Yeah.
accurate. Um, but I find that if someone says something really nice to me, for example, and it means a lot to me. In the moment, I may say, "Wow, thank you." I tend to thank people and take the compliment because I genuinely am like, "Yeah, I like that. I like that you did that. Thanks."
Hmm.
But then, if I find myself thinking about it later, I'll maybe like text them if it's somebody that I know,
Hmm.
um, and just let them know, "Hey, I appreciate what you said. It meant a lot to me." Maybe there's a more original way of saying that, but I find that even if I use cliched language when I'm replying to someone or thanking them, If I
Mhm.
really mean it, if I, like, have let it settle in my body and I'm like, "That actually mattered to me." They can sense that energy even through text, and they
Mhm.
usually have a very genuine response, and we have a good connection after that. But I wait for it to feel genuine and for me to really, like, have the space to mean what I say, and then
Mhm.
I reply, and that makes all the difference. I find, like, it causes real connections around what people say to me.
Would this would this be a situation where the compliment was given to you via text or in person, and then later you're sending a text as a follow up after
I
digesting that?
I was thinking in person first. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be a compliment. If somebody, like, I could see that they put forth effort,
Yeah.
then, sometimes I will just be like, at the end of the time seeing them, "Hey, thanks. I really appreciate that." And it's sort of the
Yeah.
quick I'm being polite, I do appreciate it, but I'm saying something because it's correct social thing to do,
Mhm.
and I want to do the correct social thing and show appreciation.
Yeah.
But if I find myself thinking about it, like, "Hey, that really mattered to me," I believe that that genuine feeling can be communicated, simply by, like, stopping and thinking and being present while you're texting. It doesn't have to be, it
Mhm.
could also be a phone call or seeing the person the next time.
Mhm.
And it comes across, like, it's just it's a bit of a tangent, but the phenomenon of, like, when you're being genuine, you really are, like, present and you mean what you say, it's so much more impactful. It's like, I think this is one of the bases of improv.
Mhm.
Like, you're not gonna be funny if you think of the joke in advance in an improv scenario,
Mhm.
but if you just speak without thinking, it's just so much funnier. If you say something, like, funny at all.
Mhm.
So, I guess I'm just saying that, like, presence and genuineness
Mhm.
connects with people a lot better, and that feels connected to what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, that's making me think of something that I haven't quite thought of before. And it's interesting for that reason. And it's interesting for a second reason because it has me referencing one of our first episodes, which I just did recently as well, which was the small talk conversation. And I think there's a theme emerging here that might come up more times. So we explored small talk, and I was surprised to find um, one of the conclusions I was surprised to find was that small talk can be less about what you're saying and more about establishing trust and a basis of understanding someone and a deepening a connection, relatively speaking. It doesn't have to be a deep connection, but it can be a deepening of that connection. And that has really stayed with me. And that's happening in this moment as well, which is that someone, you mentioned these social aspects and connection. And I think that I was going to ask you what you thought of this, and then you covered these things in what you were saying already. But that someone, coming to your show, watching your speech, something like that, and giving a complimentary piece of feedback, on something you did, it's easy to look at that one way and go, yeah, people just always give positive feedback. That's just kind of what they do. That's the social norm. I'm not going to take this on. But I think it can also be looked at as that person some depth is making an effort to connect with you. And it can be that what they're saying is more about creating that connection than it is giving a genuine assessment of your performance, right? Not
Mhm.
everyone that attends a performance of some kind, not everyone's desire or first instinct after that is going to be I want to give the most accurate, helpful assessment I can with measured positive and negative pieces of constructive criticism. Many people don't want to do that at all. They might think, well, it's not my place. I don't really, he knows more about, music or giving speeches than I do,
Mhm.
and it can be about connection, and that's kind of blown my mind a little bit because I didn't think of it that way. I and that might be, when finishing a performance, it's possible, depending on your level of experience or just your personality, it's possible to feel a little bit uncomfortable of like, oh, I know that I messed up in these few spots, or it's just kind of a way you feel coming out of a performance that can be sort of vulnerable or maybe exposed to some degree depending on how things went because you just were up there delivering some sort of speech or performance of some kind. And yeah, so it's possible that it's that frame of mind that would be focused on optimizing the quality of their performance, but that many of the people coming up and talking to you are more interested in connecting, and that following these social rules, so to speak, are efforts more in the service of connection than assessment. And that does that has it some is that something you've already thought about before, or is that landing with you in an interesting way like it is with me? Because I'm kind of like, wow, seems like you maybe thought about it more because you referenced connection specifically and that being on your mind when you're responding to someone here, whereas I was so focused on looking at it a different way.
I think it's a really great thought. I think it puts our conversation into a better frame. It evolves it.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it totally evolves it because it's true that, if you had, really phenomenal intuition, then what someone says to you, could be interpreted fairly differently from the words that they deliver to you.
Hmm.
Um, Positive or negative. They could be seeking connection, they could be seeking contrast, they could be satisfying, a psychological urge, they could be externalizing something internal to them that it's important for them to get out of them.
Yeah, which is
God,
that's already many things. There's so many different approaches people could have that aren't related to assessing the performance, you know?
yeah, right, exactly. The fact that I could just name that off the top of my head, I'm like, wow,
Yeah,
there's a lot going on in communication,
yeah,
uh, which I guess everybody sort of knows, but to break it down like this
it's
is
different,
really
yeah.
interesting. And I guess what it kind of brings me back to, I don't know what to do with this, is that I'm amazed as human beings how many signals we're giving off and how
Mhm.
many signals we can interpret in any interaction. Like you can tell if someone's dangerous,
Yeah,
even if they don't say a word. And if they were trying to act dangerous, they would seem less dangerous than
yeah,
if they really are. And you can tell that
yeah,
just as primally. And I think you can often tell if your powers of perception are finely tuned, if somebody's like attracted to you, or if someone's nervous.
mhm,
Um, and so, if you were really able to relax and have the space to think and be present, and you had all of your intuition firing, uh, you might be able to tell what someone is really saying behind the feedback, positive or negative, they're giving you, and that would
yeah,
be the most powerful of all.
and I think the tricky part is your own mind being quiet enough to be able to take on what it I or to be able to be, um, perceptive enough to understand where they're coming from. I think so many people, myself included, after certain situations, I keep coming back to performance because that's what's top of mind. There's a lot going on in my head. I'm thinking of so many different things, and that is massively coloring how I'm perceiving other people, both things I'm thinking in that moment and things that I think generally, right? Both are present, and I agree that trying to quiet some of those things can be helpful and can make it easier to understand, and that's kind of a general rule. If we can be more open and quiet in our own minds, we can learn a lot from speaking to other people because there's going to be room for us to take in more things, where if we have a lot of things going on, a lot of expectations and whatnot, that's going to not leave as much space for a nuanced, um complex perspective to come across from another person, which is kind of an interesting secondary lesson in here. Um,
Yeah, it
I've
really is. I think about that all the time.
Yeah, I have one more thing that I want to ask you about. Um, Very interesting directions here. That one of my favorite things is sometimes I'm like, are we gonna have enough to talk about with this topic? Because we like to have these conversations, um, basically live for the first time, and I'm always surprised and very delighted at some of the directions that things go in because I'm like, wow, I learned something, and I feel like I can and take that with me, and that's just exactly what my goal has been, with this podcast or channel, and I imagine the same is true for you. I would feel comfortable saying that the same is probably true for you. The one thing I wanted to ask you about, slightly different direction, but staying on the same subject. When you are giving feedback to someone, what are you personally thinking? You're someone who's very socially conscious and not in a forced or awkward way where you just are kind of following the rules and it doesn't feel genuine. But I think that's something that I mean, probably because it's natural. But that's something you do very well. You're very socially aware and socially conscious, and I'm curious what I consider myself a little more socially clumsy. I'm good around the people that I get along with best, but can be more awkward in certain social contexts. So, as someone who is more skilled in that regard, what it, what is going on in your head when you are in a position you went to someone's art opening, you listened to someone sing somewhere, something like that, you watch someone in a play that you know. What are you sort of thinking when you're walking
Mhm.
up to that person? Because there's gotta be some conscious thought of like, "Okay, I should say something positive." Maybe you've thought about that earlier in the night already to know, "Oh, I wanna make some particular observation so I can give a more, authentic piece of feedback." But would you be comfortable describing what goes on for you?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's ever asked me that. It's a great, question. Uh, you also gave me a great compliment a moment ago that I don't know if anyone's phrased a compliment to me in quite that way, so you did something
A lot
that,
of firsts here.
a lot of
Breaking a lot of new ground here.
I really believe you because it was such a unique compliment that I'm socially aware.
Yeah.
Um,
It's bullshit, it's all bullshit.
oh
I'm just kidding,
no,
I'm just kidding.
my trust. Um, so I believe most of the time that I pay someone a compliment, let's go with just
Mm,
this positive, because I think it's different on the negative side. I'm
sure.
trying to connect with them. I want them to say, like, I want them to think, uh, this guy really appreciates me.
Mhm.
And I guess I'd like to be known a little bit for appreciating. I probably wouldn't normally like think that consciously or admit that, but I think that's probably true, or perhaps I wouldn't even say it.
Yeah, I
Um,
don't think there's anything wrong with that either. I think some people could say, "Oh, well, if you're making yourself do it, then it's not genuine." And I disagree with that. I think it's demonstrating a value that's important to you, and just because it's conscious doesn't make that any less significant. So I think that's a I would consider that an outwardly good quality to go into a situation being like, "Oh, I want this person to know that I appreciated being invited or that I enjoyed something they were a part of."
yeah, thanks. I think that's that's true. But yeah, it's usually about connection. Sometimes if I really appreciate someone, if they did something I thought was just really incredible,
Mhm.
uh, I think something else is happening besides connection in those moments. I mean, you can do it purely for yourself because you're a fan. Like I can imagine, like I remember meeting Steph Curry once, just very briefly. I saw him on the street. He was staying in the same hotel that I was on a business trip, and I complimented him. And I wasn't doing it to connect with him.
Mm.
Um,
You
I said,
insulted him, you mean? You
yeah,
suck.
no. It's like, learn to shoot. Um, but I I was genuinely humbled in his
Mm,
presence because I was like, "Wow, I really like, respect, and admire this
mm,
human being."
mhm,
There's not tons of celebrities I feel that way about, but Steph Curry, he was in the middle of his title run. I lived in the same city
mhm,
where he was, making getting all these, NBA championships and breaking records, and I was just like, "Wow, this guy is giving me a real life highlight as far as
mhm,
sports goes." And so it was something that I just wanted to do or needed to do out of sheer gratefulness and, like, awe or something. So, I just
mhm,
wanna point out I'm not used to thinking about that use case or whatever, but that exists too. It's not always just to connect when you compliment. Sometimes something you just need to get out. Maybe that's what I'm
mhm.
trying to express.
Yeah, I think there's something about a celebrity encounter like that with someone that you feel particularly, inspired by, attached to, something like that, where you're like, "Ah, here's the moment. I never expected this to happen. Here's my one moment." You kinda get
Mhm.
a little bit flustered maybe or something like that. Perhaps that's not the exact right word, but you're like, I got to say something. So I think
Yeah.
that's tends to be a perspective or a position where you're less centered and thinking about it and more like, whoa, what am I going to say? So I can see that being a different situation because it's such an unusual position to be in like that. Normally, when you're watching a friend or family member or something in a performance, you're in a different frame of mind.
Yeah, and how about you? What's your answer to the question?
Um, the jury's still out. I think I I would be inclined to say that I still feel unsure, and I think that's probably not totally true. I think I'm more sure than I would assess myself to be for some reason. But connection would be important, especially if it's a friend or family member. I understand attending something like that is a supportive move. It is a something done out of support as a kind of connection. So that is what I align with. I do feel some desire. This is not true always, but in some cases, I can want to suggest something where I'm like, "Oh, I feel like I see something that perhaps isn't noticed that could elevate this better." And sometimes I have to wrestle with that because even some people can interpret constructive criticism or even a neutral observation as a bit harsher because the context they're used to receiving feedback in a situation like that is outwardly positive. So if you're
Mhm,
going against that, it can make you seem negative by comparison, even if that thing on its own would be helpful or less negative. So I struggle with that a bit because I enjoy being authentic, and that's where I feel most comfortable. And so it can be awkward sometimes because communication, there are plenty of situations where communication is expected to not be open and authentic, as hard as that is for me to accept. And that doesn't mean I'm just suffering the whole time because I understand the importance of connection and being supportive and wanting to kind of pump somebody up a little bit, after they put themselves out there or tried something that was difficult. So yeah, it can be more challenging. But one thing that I learned that my dad had mentioned at one point is that, especially when he's a musician as well, and when he sees musicians somewhere, he had said, I always try to say at least one positive thing, and that's not one positive thing and five negative things. It's just one positive thing. So you can say, "Oh, I really liked the tone you had in that third song," or something like that. So that instead of going, "Well, you guys sound great," which is a little more generic, that you can point to something specific because I think that will allow that person to feel like what you're saying is more trustworthy and therefore can have more of an impact. So that's something I think about as well, where I would try to make a particular observation that of something that someone did well, because then I feel like I can be supportive and authentic at the same time. And depending, I think only people that I had a lot of trust built with already would I be comfortable being like, and I want to say that this by and large came across really great. I just noticed something that might be helpful because to me that is a helpful thing to offer. That's something of value, especially when other people aren't willing to do it. Because if many people are interested in elevating, continuing to elevate, that's something I feel very strongly about. So it's kind of a bit more wrestling for me in there because I'm like, "Ooh, I want to be direct and authentic, but I gotta factor these other bits in." So that's kinda what I would be thinking, but I would want to say all the things I would want all the things that I said to be genuine. It's very difficult for me to say something that I don't, believe to be true, so I try to find something that I experienced that I really enjoyed so I can then do that and feel like I'm being authentic as well as
mm.
supporting someone.
Yeah, when you said that, you kind of brought me emotionally through when you said, "Oh, and, there's something I would add," or whatever, that's a
Uh-huh.
critique. You brought me through the emotional experience a little bit of, when someone needs to bring up something that they wanna give you constructive criticism about.
Yeah.
And in a way, my emotions rose. I was like, "Oh god, I'm gonna
Uh,
get criticized." I guess because
yeah.
I must, as a perfectionist or whatever, I obviously don't like that on some level, but,
Sure.
over time, I've trained myself to find it very valuable. And what I've
Yeah.
noticed, because I think you have done that, on a few things with me, like, it could be a piece of equipment I was using, like, "Oh, you should know that it sounds a bit tinny," whatever, or
Mm.
something.
Mhm.
That you do it in a very constructive way, I still feel, I feel cared about in the moment, rather
Mhm.
than you're just kinda
Yeah.
imparting your knowledge coldly and leaving me to feel criticized or something, which, I guess I
Yeah.
sound kinda soft that I even, think about it that way, but I appreciate that you have found a way to critique in a way that doesn't just feel constructive, it feels caring, like I was saying, so
Yeah, thank you. That is something that I put effort into, and there is intentionality and effort behind that. I think from experiences I've probably learned how to do that better. And again, that's something that um would be reserved for people that I trust more because I would want to be sure that it's not going to land in a way where they feel exposed or feel bad about it. And yeah, so that is an interesting thing to point out. I'm glad you mentioned the perspective of how that came across. You said, "Oh, this, could read as soft or something," but I think that's important to verbalize that because I would feel comfortable saying that everyone experiences that to some degree at one point or another in one situation or another. So being able to name that and describe it, I think is helpful because um yeah, because it is an experience and one that a lot of people might not want to talk about because, we try to people generally try to avoid situations of feeling, vulnerable or saying something that makes us feel some type of way, as we both like to say. um, so yeah, I think it was good to I think good to point that out, and yeah, and I appreciate the compliment because that is something that I do try to put effort into, and um, feels like offering something of value. It's not, I think some people criticize because it makes them feel better than that person of like, well, you kind of screwed up the second half, which maybe internally they feel a little bit more superior. So some people stand on other people to feel taller. And I think I like to offer that out of um I think it is a caring gesture of, if I like the person and know that they are attached to um, improving, then calling attention to something that they might not notice or that someone might not have pointed out can be uncomfortable in the moment. And I definitely understand that because I can feel that way too, but ultimately can be a helpful thing in the long run.
yeah.
And that's where improving can be difficult because it means acknowledging that we are not all the way there yet. I think that gets off into a more generalized tangent, but I think that's definitely present here. Getting feedback like that can be hard because it's like, oh man, I thought I had done that already, or I thought I was further along or something. But ultimately, it's good to know where to go next, even if it means more effort and more work is required.
Yeah, that at least for me, I learned that with age, and it was part of what I perceived to be like the wisdom that you gain in exchange for maybe having less mobility of your body or flexibility or whatever you lose as you
Yeah.
get a little bit older. The wisdom that comes with it, like that's part of it, is being able to value feedback that's about your mistakes, because you're
Hmm.
like, "Oh, this is the only thing that's actually gonna make me learn and better if I care about that." So,
Yeah.
even though it doesn't feel good, I'll withstand it and, try to make it something I can welcome as best as I
Yeah.
can. That's a really healthy attitude.
And
Some young people do it, and I'm, like, so impressed, but I
yeah.
don't think I was like that when I was younger.
Yeah. And I think, as you pointed out, it goes a long way when that comes from a person that feels like they're handling it in a thoughtful way. If someone's like, you really tanked in the second half there, and it's someone you don't know that well, that one, that's not very actionable, and two, that doesn't feel like they're saying that to try to help you. It seems like they are just making a judgment of your performance, and that feels bad because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's it's hard to get anything positive from that, and you're like, I don't really like you anymore.
Yeah. That's so true.
Well,
Cool.
yeah, any other thoughts? I feel like we covered a lot. I'm actually very happy with where this went and where this ended up. There's something really exciting about just going where it goes, and I think because we know each other very well and we have different but fairly complementary life experience, we tend to, at least in my opinion, touch on some pretty interesting things, and I often walk away with more of an understanding than I had before, which is pretty exciting in and of itself. It really is an exploration or a search for meaning, if you will.
Totally agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We really want to connect with you guys and understand what you think. Consider the comment section to be an extension of this dialogue and a place where you can make yourself heard. We really want this to be um, something where we're hearing from more than just each other. Additionally, if you want to support the channel, hit the like button. That is obviously very helpful, as most people know nowadays. Additionally, subscribe if you want to see these videos in your feed, and it's also a way to support the channel for free. And lastly, if you want to be notified when we upload, click the bell icon after subscribing. And yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next time.